Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and today I wanted to talk about the things that I learned from visiting farms during Maine's Open Farm Day, and also by going to farmers markets and talking to people that are growing food and selling it there. So let's dig in and talk about 5 things that I've learned from visiting other farms. So my first thing that I learned is that there are lots of ways to have a farm. Some farms were conventional farming practices, others were eco-friendly. Some focus more on raising beef and cattle. Others maybe did, certain seasonal summer veggies, like certain veggies like corn or pumpkins for fall, those kind of things. Others had like stores on site of their farms that had like food things available, produce, things that they had produced, but also things that other local growers and producers had made as well. Some had various like kitschy or primitive sort of farmhouse styled items in there. They reminded me a lot of like certain garden centres and nurseries in the UK that just have like a ton of homeware stuff kind of attached to, various greenhouses full of plants. There was one in Lincolnshire, and the name of it, I can't remember. It's been decades since I've been, but like every like December or in the run up to the holidays, they always had like these huge displays of like, trees and ornaments and everything there. And it kind of reminded me a lot of that. Some of these like little farmhouse, like farm shops and stuff that I visited were kind of like that. They would have produce and things that were available, or meat that was in freezers, but then there was this overwhelming amount of stuff for the house that you could buy, which is great, like if you're looking for gifts for people, but sometimes it was like really, really overwhelming. Certainly like the smell of things. There was one place that we looked at, and the scent of the soaps and the candles and stuff that they had in there it was really, really overwhelming for such a small space. But one of the things that I learned from looking at these places is that there is a massive amount of diversification that happens on small farms locally that are generating an income, right? So this person had not only this farm store, but within that farm store there was various things that they had handmade, or their family had handmade, or things that they'd sourced from other makers relatively locally, or as far away as Portland. And I say as far away as Portland, it's like a 40-minute drive away. So, there was things that are there that were selling too. The lady that I was talking to there, she was saying how there's these like really pretty printed tea towels that were there that I was kind of eyeing at looking at getting from my mum for the holidays, and she was saying that she really struggles to keep them in stock because they're always really popular. They had tons of candles and things that had been handmade and hand poured, like various samplers of tea that were made. They had lots of things for kids that were there, or, small decor items, like scented lavender sachets and things like that, are always popular, even now. I remember like my grandmother's house, like having scented lavender sachets that we made with her. And that's one of my fond memories is, picking the lavender out of the garden and then turning them into these little pomanders or little scented sachets that we would then put in the drawers, not in your underpants, but like in in the chest of drawers to keep moths and things away from your clothes. So lots of things like that. So there's a lot of diversity that happens on a local farm. But how does that relate for a homesteader? Because obviously a farmer's doing it to make an income, right? You've got to pay the farmer, and you've got to pay the laborers, and you need to have money coming in to be able to support, wear and tear, property taxes, right? All of that good stuff, mortgage, anything else that you've got to pay down, right? But as a homesteader, you're not necessarily going to be looking at selling things, right? And there's a whole plethora of other things that go on when you're wanting to sell stuff, right? If you're doing, let's say, soap and stuff like that, then you are going to want to think about having personal insurance and stuff. So it can get a little bit complicated when you start to sell, but that's not to be put off by it, because there are millions of people who do this every day. But more as a homesteader, you're looking at diversification, not necessarily as revenue for your homestead, but perhaps as savings that you can glean by not having to purchase something from the store. So for example, if you're raising backyard chickens, the eggs from your hens are meaning that you don't need to purchase eggs from the store, which then means that that is saving you money from your grocery bill. Or maybe you've got a great harvest going on for cucumbers and you often buy, pickles in jars from the store. Well, if you learn how to make your own pickles from the cucumbers that you are growing, then you don't need to purchase pickles from the grocery store either, and that could save you some money. You might already be thinking, yeah, but I don't have the canner and I don't have the jars and I don't have yada, 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 yada. Well, if you maybe get chatting with a neighbor or a friend, maybe they have a canner that you can borrow and maybe you can have a canning party together. That's one way how I first started canning, was I canned with a friend who had the canner. I had smaller canners. I had a water bath canner and things already, but they had a pressure canner and we basically divided and conquered together, right? I handled jam and they were handling making tomato sauce, right? We were able to combine our efforts, and they even had jars already available. So the deal was that I brought some of the produce, we split getting the cans, and it didn't matter, because the glass jars and things that they already had, they'd picked up from a yard sale. So if you're thinking of getting into canning, now's the summer as I'm recording this, so maybe check out some of the local estate sales that are going on. If you're wanting to check things out from the thrift store, I often see glass jars at the thrift store too. The only caution that I would throw out is to really, really check that they have not been broken, that there is no fracture lines or anything that's visible there. And before you go ahead and can your precious jams or pickles or whatever it is that you are going with, if you have picked up glass jars and things that have obviously been used from somewhere secondhand, I would definitely get some old lids, if you've got any of those handy from canning, or somebody that know's got some that they can give you, not necessarily the new ones, but I would check the integrity of the jars by either putting some water in them and then trying to can them and making sure that they're going to be able to actually can safely, whether it's in a water bath canner or in a pressure canner. Now though, I have plenty of jars that I have moved with across the country. I've got enough jars that I shouldn't really need to be purchasing anymore. But again, always check, and check online too. Like if you've got local Facebook groups or anything like that, you could always ask if somebody has some. And a lot of the times I find that people are actually a lot more willing to barter. It's not necessarily just about money and purchasing things directly from people. Sometimes they're a lot more amenable to bartering and swapping for something instead. So those are some options there. But, that's a little segue into reuse and repurpose, which is number 2, and that is incredibly common on farms. I have seen repurposed, reused things to make greenhouses, chicken coops, goat housing, even chicken pluckers. I've seen some really, really interesting designs that make things work without spending lots and lots of money. Simple structures that are built from materials already on hand, or those that have been found nearby, are very, very common on small farms and homesteads. As my husband and I were driving around, we saw loads, and I mean loads of furniture being left by the roadside that's for free. And actually we commented on how you could furnish a house by driving around some of these rural communities in the summer. And as we were driving around, we saw this absolutely gorgeous mustard yellow cabinet, and I really wanted it. I will be honest, I really, really wanted this gorgeous mustard yellow cabinet. And which was really ironic because I'd literally just been telling my husband how I did not want to paint our house mustard yellow because I wasn't quite in love with the color. And then I saw this mustard yellow cabinet and I wanted it. So my bad. However, there was a side table that went along with it, but as we saw it on the way back, it was being picked up by a young couple who were obviously starting out. My stepson even found a new chair for his apartment for free on the roadside. And even when we lived in the suburbs, like free furniture, TVs, working appliances, even like fridges, dryers or washers were pretty common. One person's trash is definitely someone else's treasure. And you know, what a great way to furnish a house, especially if you're starting out and you're wanting to go down this route of becoming a homesteader, then, you know, by picking up things for free or for very, very little money. And even as a suburban homesteader, what do you need on your homestead, and how can you build it with what you already have? Can you build raised beds with trees or branches or bricks that you already have on the property, or have found for free locally? Can you convert that free dresser or chest of drawers by the roadside into a quail coop or maybe a rabbit hutch? Can those wooden crates that you found become a bedside table or even a bookcase? Can you staple an old clean bedsheet on the back of some wooden picture frames that you found laying outside that don't have any backing or glass on them, but if you tack on a old bed sheet and then add some string so they hang horizontally or flat like a table, and voila, you have a cheap and easy herb or seed drying rack that you can hang somewhere and then use. Could you turn thrifted yarn into a mesh or string bag for a farmer's market so you don't have to keep purchasing a bag all the time? Maybe you can turn that thrifted yarn into a mesh or string bag to store onions in. Maybe you can turn old t-shirts into a reusable bag and use that when you go pick up groceries. And maybe you can turn some of them into cleaning rags. I know I've shared before the story of my grandparents keeping like clothing scraps and old clothes that were then converted into cleaning rags. And I can't even tell you the number of times I would help like my granny polish the brass and the silver with the rags, or help with dusting and cleaning during the summer holidays, because that's how my sister and I earned our pocket money, or our allowance, was by helping with chores like cleaning and stuff. But I mean, I can't even tell you the number of times like we were using these old clothing rags and stuff, and then the ones like I always seem to pick up subconsciously were always ones that ended up being like my granddad's undercrackers at one point, like, or his duds and stuff. But I mean, now looking back on it, I mean, as a kid, I was like, oh no, these were like granddad's underpants. Like, no, I don't want to be using that as a cleaning cloth. And my grand's there like, it's clean, it's fine. Like, they're not, his underpants anymore. But now as I'm older, it's actually kind of a funny story to look back on. I mean, I get it. They were cotton. They're soft. They became really good cleaning cloths for a myriad of different things around the home. And it helps keep things out of the garbage, and out of the trash, giving things a new lease of life. And in the same line, can you repair things that are broken and torn? I've discovered visible mending, or modern mending as it's called, and it looks absolutely beautiful how people have mended their clothes in a really unique way. And, they've got a piece of clothing that is really unique. And now I'm gathering all of my ripped clothes, and I have a horrific number of ripped clothes, particularly at the elbows, from going through like the dog pen or the chicken coop. I would often catch things on my elbow and then, tear elbows in work clothes too, no less. So I found a bunch of clothes from moving, unpacked a box, but they were all kind of torn and they fit. Now I'm starting to lose weight. And what a great idea, like being able to mend them and repair them in a unique way. And then I can literally say that I have, a piece of clothing that I have created that is just as unique as me. It keeps things out of the garbage for longer. It keeps more money in your pocket by not having to buy new. And even though like I buy clothing from the thrift store all the time, I really love the idea of having clothing that is as unique as I am. Like the things I get compliments on the most are the things that I have either made myself or upcycled and repaired myself, which is really quite fun actually thinking about it, that's what I get most compliments from. It's never something that has been mass produced, that has been bought off a rack somewhere. It's always the things that I have either thrifted and then upcycled or made some subtle changes to. So that's kind of fun to think about, the things that you can do there. And I know if my mum is listening to this podcast, she might be cringing, because we had this whole conversation about why be buying things from the thrift store, because I was telling her about some really beautiful chairs that I picked up from a thrift store and how much I love them and how they're perfect setting for our house that was built in 1790s. And I sort of went on to say like that I'd bought couple of tops and things from the thrift store too, and she's like, well, why would you buy things from the thrift store when you can get them new? And I sort of said, because I don't want to be buying things new and at full price, and because I like the idea of things not going into a landfill, and I like to make wiser choices with my money. So that was kind of an interesting conversation between like myself and my mum. Whereas, as a kid, my sister and I spent a lot of time like going to the charity shops, as my grandmother called it, but we went to a lot of thrift stores, and we would take our hard-earned pocket money from polishing the brass doorknobs and dusting and all of the things that we did over the summer. And one of the best things and one of the best memories that I ever had is going to the thrift store. And I remember like finding little blue and white china plates, with those gorgeous designs and things on them, and I would spend hours looking through various like dishes and stuff, because I wanted things that were blue and white that matched like my grandparents' blue and white china, which I've ended up inheriting. And I was so proud like when I would come home with just a few dollars spent and all of these treasures that I had. And going into college and coming out of college, like I always like to go to the thrift store and see what you had, because I enjoyed being able to find a bargain, find something that would fit, and also having that kind of slightly more satisfactory feeling of paying $50 or whatever and having a bunch of pants or a bunch of tops or, you know, various outfits and things that I could use throughout the seasons, rather than, you know, paying $50 on one item of clothing brand new. So having that kind of homesteader or, you know, farmer mindset of using things up and, you know, getting things frugally has been with me for a long time. But now kind of seeing it from, you know, other farmers and other people within the community, it's kind of interesting to see that it's a lot more normal. And I really love going to the thrift store, and I inevitably end up like chatting with people. There was a lady who I was chatting with at a local thrift store who found a teapot, and it was amazing. I loved it. It was incredibly unique. And, you know, she was really excited to be taking it home. And she was telling me how she collected teapots. And I think her grandmother was also from the UK. So it was quite nice to kind of chat with her about, you know, how her grandmother used to make tea, which, you know, is the same way that I make tea. You know, you have a tea bag for every person that wants a cup of tea, plus an extra tea bag for the pot, and then you know, pour hot water in there. But before you even put the tea bags in, you must first warm the teapot. So that was kind of fun to talk about those things. So if you've never visited a thrift store, definitely go take a look and see what you can find. Sometimes going there is just the fun and weird things that you find. Actually, some of the fun things that we used to do would be finding random things at thrift stores and then leaving them at our friends on the porch. And there was it was like a giant walnut shaped cookie jar with a squirrel on the top. And we left it there with some things in it, and then over the next like few years it made its way like back and forth between us as an ongoing gag, which was kind of fun, until it broke, which was a really sad day that broke. But I digress. You know, one of the things that I absolutely enjoy and love about this sort of homesteading lifestyle is thinking outside of the box. How can you reuse something and convert it into something else, right? I mean, I've seen it was a trailer that had been converted, not like a caravan or, you know, an RV type of trailer, not like that. It was like a, you know, a flatbed trailer that had like a shed built on it. And really random, but that was like the chicken brooder that one farm had been using, and it was like a temporary housing thing, and the farmer loved it because it meant it was really easy for him to hook it up to his tractor and then move it to a different field or a different area, and, you know, the birds can come out of that coop and, you know, do what they do, scratching around that field without having to interfere with things in, you know, their newly planted or their ornamental gardens and stuff. So that was pretty cool. And I've even seen, granted this was back in the UK, but I had seen where sort of chicken tractors or small scale chicken arcs, I guess they were called. They were like a rounded, almost like a hoop house that had been built, and they had old feed sacks, like the plastic bags from feed and compost and stuff like that. That was the waterproof covering on it, and then everything had chicken wire put over it. So I think there was chicken wire on the underside, so there was like hoops that had been made, and I can't remember if they were either plastic or metal, but there was hoops, and then there was a layer of chicken wire, and then the plastic feed sacks and stuff to keep the water out, and then chicken wire again. and they were used to basically raise meat birds in. Now, granted, in the UK, there's a lot less predators than there are in various places in, the US. And certainly that's nothing I could do here. That's just not a sturdy enough structure for me to be able to have birds in. But it worked incredibly well for somewhere where there wasn't a fox problem, and, they didn't have some of these bigger predators. Like, they weren't worried that raccoons were going to be, getting in there or anything. And it did a really good job. It was a cheap and easy way for a farmer to raise a few meat birds very quickly, but out on pasture with, very little money. So there are definitely ways that you can, turn things into something else and help with your homesteading enterprise, so to speak. So, think about what you need on your property, and what are things that, if you were going to go out and buy it, what would that look like? But then maybe start to think of, what do I already have, and how can I convert this into something and make it myself? We're doing that right now with the trestle table that my husband's building. We found some old pine boards. Really, really old. Our house is 200 and something years old, and these pine boards are at least 100. And they were just stacked up in the wood shop, and he's now turning them into the top of our trestle table, and repurposing and reusing things that he finds in there as much as he can. So have a think about it, and I would love to see in the Facebook group what you guys come up with. What are some of the things that you upcycle and recycle and use in your garden and on your homestead? I would love to see whether it is clothes and bags or whether it's bigger structures too. I love seeing those kind of things, and I know other homesteaders do as well. All right, let's move on to number 3, and that is that farmers get inspired by other farmers and the things that they see on the interwebs, right? So sure, there's lots of tried and true or traditional things on a farm, right? You usually see fences that are made from downed trees, and there's electrical fencing, stuff like that. But there's also farmers that are trying something new and experimenting. And I think out of the few places that I visited, and the farmers and things that I've talked to, there may be only like 1 or 2 that were very much like, no, this is how we grow things, and I don't deviate from that. This is what works. But there's so many that are constantly trying something new and experimenting, whether it is reduced tillage, like very, very little digging. That was being tested out on one farm. Letting weeds grow was being tested on another. One farm was converting more keyhole garden beds or mandala gardens versus kind of the traditional rows. Somebody else was experimenting with integrated pest management. Another person was doing letting areas go wild, or having like rewilding areas, and some were just happy with more rigid weed cutting and conventional managing of pests, right? That's totally fine. The one thing that I realized though is they don't jump in, they don't go all in with a method. They test it and they try it for a season or 2, and then expand it a little bit more, and then test it and trial it a little bit more and see if the same thing works. And you can do that too. If you're wanting something similar in your garden, then you can look at having a smaller area and testing and experimenting and seeing if it is something that works, and whether you want to do it on a larger scale. Number 4 is that smaller vegetable garden areas are incredibly productive. And one farm that I visited had a vegetable garden that seemed awfully small for what they were doing. So they managed a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture program, and they had a farmers market, and they were able to feed their family. They had this garden area fenced, so they had little larger mammal damage, and it was very intensively planted, so it was very, very productive. When I looked at this little garden area, I was kind of blown away with just how small it was, but also it made me really think and reevaluate my garden and my current garden struggles, right? I realized that I have put a lot of garden beds kind of too far apart to manage well to protect from deer and other herbivores. I don't have the resources right now to fence over 3 acres of land to keep the deer out. But if I had gone with one area, a smaller garden that was fenced, I would have had better success. Like I wouldn't be so frustrated at, all my cabbages and everything being eaten by the deer, right? I would have had a lot more of a harvest and things coming in if I had, just gone with a smaller area and fenced it, kind of like I did with the dog pen. And after driving around the state, I see so many smaller fenced-in gardens that are incredibly abundant. And even in the Facebook group, there are some incredible, very inspiring gardens that are out there, and people are incredibly productive in a small space. So if you're part of the Facebook group, definitely check out what's going on in there. And thank you to those people who have shared what your garden looks like and being able to help inspire other people, because that's what helps that creativity, right? Is that inspiration coming from others, and hey, maybe I can try doing that in my garden. But I will say that although that I have a bit of a hike to visit the garden beds, I love seeing the microclimates change. I love seeing what thrives in those areas. I like seeing what pests or animal activity is absent from different beds, and those that have been quite honestly decimated. It's been quite interesting to see the difference, and it's really just a case of just walking further down the hill, which is quite interesting to see, because there's a lot more activity from animals closer to the house, which isn't really what I expected. I expected the beds that were further away to have a lot more animal activity on them, but it's not the case. So having that perspective is helpful in figuring out where I'm going to be putting things. But I will say that we've got a contractor who's been on our property working on pulling down the barn over the last few weeks, and he said actually how much he loved kind of visiting the garden and walking around it, and he was like telling me that it's like you're in a different world down there. You can't even see the house, you can't really hear much of what's going on close to the road. It's just nice to chill out and watch the garden grow. And that was kind of nice to hear from somebody outside of my immediate family say that, because that's kind of what I was going for. I wanted something where you kind of took your time going around the garden, and I like the exercise, it's good for me, but I mean, it's a pain in the butt to water when I've got to drag 5 gallons of water down there to do a little bit of watering at a time. But it's kind of nice to say and to hear from somebody else that actually it was kind of nice just to kind of wander around and see what's going on, because how the garden beds are designed, they kind of force you to take a different route. You can't just kind of hop over all of the garden beds to get somewhere quickly. You've kind of got to go up and down and through and around, and that's kind of nice for me. I find it a real pain when I've then got to mow it, but when things are mowed and it's easy to walk through, it's kind of nice. But this smaller garden at the farm that I visited has kind of inspired me for next year. So my keyhole and mandala no-till garden that I posted in the Facebook group, that I'm going to be fencing in. And part of that fencing is going to include, the pear trees and things that are there. And that's fine. The beds that I have dug already are going to be mulched, and they're going to be used. So they're going to be used for some small scale grain production, some green manures growing, a couple of beds of milkweed and annual native flowers, since I've seen that after letting the natural meadow come through, the butterflies and the bees are incredibly abundant here. I'm also going to be putting in the chicken tractors on the garden bed before mulching. Then as that larger fencing comes in, I can start to expand that garden, experiment with new techniques, even trying new varieties if I want to avoid cross-pollination. I can still use those existing garden beds that I have dug from my ongoing landrace seed breeding projects and to test plants further in reduced water and other lower input conditions, right? I'm still going to be able to use what I already have in place, but for next year, because I'm going to want to be really honing in my skills at growing food to be able to be living off the land, I'm going to be pulling it in and going smaller to facilitate that. Now, speaking of seeds, my last point for today's podcast is that some farmers used hybrid seeds, some used open pollinated seeds. Heirlooms were kind of few and far between, and when I was kind of talking to the farmers about that, they all kind of said the same thing, which was heirlooms needed a lot of work and were too needy for them to manage when they're trying to, make this a profitable enterprise, which, farmers need to be paid, right? They need to be able to earn a living being, doing a really important job, which is providing food for us as human beings, right? Or the animals that if they're producing for feed. Now, some farmers saved seed with gusto and were incredibly excited to talk about their seed saving. Others bought new seed every year. They did what worked for them and their farm, and that is definitely a leaf that you can take for your homestead and garden. Do what works for you and your garden. If you want to save seeds from everything in your garden, then do it. If you want to save seeds from just a few favorites, do it. If you don't want to save seeds and you just want to buy new seeds and try something new every year, then do it. There isn't really a right or wrong way to garden and grow your own food. And I would love to hear from you. Have you visited farms or other gardens recently? What did you learn and what did you want to try in your garden or around the homestead? Let me know over in the Facebook group. And until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully and I'll see you all next week.